Lurkers explores the dark side of the online world. It contains adult themes and disturbing content for mature audiences only. Some messages and calls are recreated by human voices with sound design.
A sheriff steps out of his vehicle with a detective beside him. The house in front of them is still. No sirens, no shouting, just a closed door, and a search warrant in his hand that has taken months to reach this address. Inside this house is a teenage girl whose name has been pulled through message after message. Her relationship, her friends, her school, her private life, all of it has been turned into ammunition by a number no one can pin down. The sheriff waits as a woman from the house walks toward him across the yard. She sounds calm, casual, unexpected, just a normal day interrupted. The sheriff says, "Hello," then carefully, "We gotta have a conversation." She responds, "Okay." He explains there is a search warrant tied to the devices. Then he asks if anyone else is home. The answer comes back. Lauryn is. The sheriff says he would rather Lauryn stay in her room. And somehow, that makes the house feel smaller because somewhere beyond this doorway is the girl at the center of everything. A girl who has been living with an unknown number in her pocket. A girl whose school has been whispering, searching, accusing, guessing. A girl whose name has become part of a mystery nobody can solve. Inside the house, the sheriff asks to see a phone, then another phone, even a laptop. Everything feels ordinary. The carpet, the walls, the quiet room, until Lauryn peeks down the hall, her eyes terrified, confused, trying to understand why a sheriff is standing inside her home. But what no one in the house understands yet is that the sheriff already knows who is behind it. The unknown number, the anonymous texts, the person who, for nearly 2 years on and off, has terrorized Beal City from behind a screen. One notification at a time, one rumor at a time, one suspect at a time, until an entire school has been brought to its knees. In a world where connection is effortless, every click feels safe, but online, trust can be deceiving. This is Lurkers, true stories of trust, desire, and how technology, if unchecked, can turn it all against us. Before we get into this story, I want to say something. This case is a little different for me. I actually learned about it before Lurkers even existed. Before the first episode, the Khalil Wheeler Weaver case. Before I even knew exactly what this show was going to be. I remember reading about it, and later watching a documentary on the case, and thinking, this is the kind of story I would want to tell if I ever made a show about the dangers that hide online. What made this story stay with me was that it was not just about an unknown number. If you have been with us from the beginning, you know we have covered stories before where the danger was closer than people realized. But this case does something different. It shows how one hidden number can turn an entire circle of people against each other. And I mean people who loved each other, people who trusted each other, people who thought they knew where the danger was coming from. Yeah, it's crazy. It shows how one number can turn their entire world upside down, how it can make classmates look suspicious, how it can make friends question friends, how it can make a whole school search for the answer in every direction, except the one place no one is ready to look. And friends, before we go there, if Lurkers means something to you, make sure you're following the show wherever you're listening. And if this show makes you think of someone who needs to hear it, send it their way. It helps more people find lurkers when they need it. Moving forward. This case begins in Beal City, Michigan. Yes, a small town, a small school. Here, everybody knowing everybody can feel comforting. Until it doesn't. I mean, let's face it, in a school like that, privacy is thin. Stories move quickly. A look in the hallway becomes a theory by lunch. And for teenagers, yeah, you and I were one of those. That kind of place can feel even smaller because so much of their life is already happening in public, at games, at parties, and nowadays on phones, which, as you know, add that mega boost of social awkwardness and pressure. So picture the reality series The Bachelor, but on steroids. That was the world that Lauryn Licari was growing up in. She had gotten her first phone at 13, and she liked it the way a lot of kids do. It's where everyone is. Friends, jokes, plans, pictures, that little place in your hand that makes you feel like you belong. Lauryn met Owen McKenny in 7th grade. They were 12, still kids. At that age, a crush doesn't feel small. It feels like the whole day has a new center. Owen was athletic. Lauryn was athletic too. They moved through the same school, the same sports world, the same small circle where friends and relationships overlap, where everybody knows a little bit of everybody's business. Eventually, Owen asked her out, and for about a year, they were inseparable and known. Then around October of 2020, something strange arrived. It was about 2 weeks before a Halloween party. The party was hosted by Chloe Wilson and her family. Classmates went. Parents knew about it. People talked about who was invited and who wasn't. Lauryn wasn't originally invited, but Owen invited her anyway. And that is when Lauryn received the first message from an unknown number.
Hi, Lauryn. Owen is breaking up with you. He no longer likes you and hasn't liked you for a while. It's obvious he wants me. He laughs, smiles, touches my hair. Not sure what he told you, but he is coming to the Halloween party and we're both down to fuck. You are a sweet girl, but I know I can give him what he wants. Sorry, not sorry.
I know. It sounds ridiculous now, but believe me, once we zoom out, it won't feel funny anymore. It was crude and sexual, aimed directly at their relationship. For kids their age, a message like that is not only confusing, it's disturbing. And of course, Lauryn thought maybe it was a classmate, someone just messing with her and Owen. So she started asking around. She asked Chloe, because it was Chloe's party. And at that point, Chloe was close enough to be one of the first people Lauryn questioned. For a while, the simplest explanation was the easiest one to believe. Someone was being stupid. Someone was trying to start something. Someone just needed to be ignored. And then, after the Halloween party, the messages stopped. Things seemed better. School went back to normal. Friends were still friends, and Lauryn and Owen were still together. They told themselves that whatever that was over. But almost a year later, the messages came back, and this time it didn't feel like one ugly joke before a party. It felt like someone was trying to break them. And just before you think, oh my god, why didn't they try to? Yes, they tried to call the number. No answer. The sender would not pick up. It would only text back.
You are the ugliest person I've ever seen. Don't fucking wear leggings. Ain't no one want to see your anorexic flat ass.
The messages, which by the way the content you heard just now is very real, pushed at the same place over and over. Owen, Lauryn, their relationship, their trust. And then came the detail that made it harder to dismiss. The sender called Lauryn by her nickname. Lo, not Lauryn. Lo. That one detail changed the shape of the fear. It made Lauryn think this had to be someone who had been around her before, someone who knew her, someone close enough to know what people called her when adults were not listening. It was several messages a day, at least 6, sometimes more. They started to feel impossible to ignore. So the question was no longer only, who would send something like this? It was worse. The question was now, who knew enough to make it hurt this much? At Beal City, the messages did not stay between Lauryn and Owen. Owen started telling people in class what was happening. At first, it sounded like insults from an unknown number, but then the messages started repeating things from conversations they were having in class. That changed everything. If the sender knew what was being said at school, then the sender might be in school. Beal City was a small K-12 school district with around 700 students total. Lauryn's class had about 30 kids. These were people who had known each other since kindergarten. Of course, every text became a clue. If Lauryn got a message during the school day, she looked around. Who had their phone out? Who looked down? Who stepped into the hallway? Who could have typed it? Then there was the night. Lauryn and Owen would FaceTime and compare notes. What came in today? What was nearby? What group could it be? The unknown numbers started making everyone around them look possible, and the messages kept getting worse. They attacked Lauryn's body. They made her question what she wore to school, how she looked, how her hair looked. Eventually, she said it got so bad she did not want to go to school anymore. That was when the parents got pulled in more seriously. Owen's parents started taking his phone at night and reading through everything from start to finish. At this point, it was not 1 or 2 ugly messages. There were days when the texts came in at 30, 40, even 50 a day. So both families went to the school. Kendra, Lauryn's mom, and Jill, Owen's mom, were part of those conversations too. They compared notes, what Lauryn had received, what Owen had received, and whether anything was changing. Cause if Lauryn and Owen were on school property when some of the texts came in, the school had to get involved. School officials thought they were dealing with a typical cyberbullying case. Serious, but still something a school might know how to handle. But then they saw the messages. Beal City Superintendent William Chillman later described how extreme they were.
They were vulgar and nasty enough in nature to make a 53-year-old man blush. The evidence was extraordinary, the egregiousness of these texts, and we knew this was a serious matter.
Lauryn and Owen were called into the office. They even became part of the question. School officials thought Lauryn could be sending the messages to herself for attention. They didn't know if Owen could be involved. And guess what happened? Yeah, go ahead. They ruled them out pretty quickly. Their responses seemed genuine, so the search moved outward. As Big Rapids News later reported, Principal Dan Boyer started questioning students who had heard about the texts, who knew details, who had been around Lauryn and Owen when certain things were said. Then he started using video surveillance. When a message came in during school, Lauryn reported the exact time to Principal Dan Boyer. He would check the timestamp against the school cameras. Who was in the hallway? Who was on their phone? Who had stepped out of class? But there was a problem. A camera can show a student holding a phone. It can't always show whether they are sending a Snapchat, texting a friend, or writing the message that is destroying 2 teenagers' lives. The families tried blocking the numbers, but every time one number was blocked, another one appeared. The school suggested changing Lauryn and Owen's numbers completely, but the families worried that would erase the only trail they had in finding out who was behind it. Meanwhile, the messages kept doing exactly what the sender seemed to want. Lauryn and Owen kept fighting more. The text kept saying Owen had been with other girls. Lauryn would question him. Owen would deny it. Then another message would come in, and the same argument would start again. They were still kids. Lauryn would later call Owen her first love, but Owen eventually told Lauryn that maybe if they gave the sender what they wanted, the messages would stop. They could break up for now and try again someday. So, they stopped talking. But the messages didn't stop. They got worse.
Laura needs to go kill herself. She shouldn't be alive. She shouldn't be at this school anymore.
And that was the breaking point. This was no longer just harassment and cyberbullying. The messages had moved into threats of harm, and now everyone was worried about Lauryn and Owen's safety and mental health. By then, it was too big for the school to handle it on its own. Everyone wanted the same thing: make it stop, finding out who was doing it. And that was about the time Sheriff Mike Main got involved. Sheriff Mike Main was contacted by the school district about the cyberbullying and harassment. Both sets of parents met at Beal City High School with the superintendent and principal. They explained that this had been going on for over a year. Main thought he was probably looking for a group of students, a close group, the kind of group that would know details, share information, and keep quiet. So he started where everyone else had started, inside the school circle. Once or twice a week, Main came to the school and checked in with Lauryn and Owen, but the messages kept coming. During basketball season, the texts started referencing games. Lauryn got messages about how she played, who scored, and details that made it feel like someone was watching from close range. Then one message mentioned the number of points that someone had scored in the game the night before. Lauryn and her family checked the score chart, and only one person had scored that amount: Chloe Wilson. Chloe's name already had history. Her family hosted the Halloween party when the first unknown message started. Chloe and Owen had been close before Owen dated Lauryn. There was talk that Chloe liked Owen, and Lauryn and Chloe played basketball together, but they really didn't get along. So now Chloe looked like more than a classmate. She looked like a possible motive.
Come in.
Main called Chloe in. She denied it. She said she was not close with Lauryn. She said she had nothing to do with the messages, but the more people looked at it, the more everything seemed to point back at her. Then Main started looking at two other girls in that same circle, Sophie and Macy. His early theory was that this might not be one person acting alone. It could be a close group of students sharing information and staying quiet. Sophie was questioned. Other kids were questioned. Phones were checked. Parents searched their own children's phones, looking for messages, burner apps, anything that could explain where the texts were coming from. But nothing locked the case down. Outside the interviews, the damage kept spreading. Chloe, Macy, and Sophie were seen together at school. Parents were upset. The girls on the basketball team were fighting. Families wanted answers. Everybody had a theory, and every theory had a name attached to it. Then another clue seemed to point back at Chloe. Yes, friends, I know. If you ever wanted to know how it feels to be in a maze, this case is it. Just when it seemed like Chloe had nothing to do with it, some of the messages came from numbers with Florida area codes. And around the same time, Chloe and her family had taken a spring break trip to Florida. Two people already looking at Chloe. That felt like another arrow pointing in the same direction. Chloe said it wasn't her, so Chloe's phone was provided for a forensic download. Police searched the phone and found nothing, but the messages still kept coming. Even stranger, the sender started mentioning that Chloe's phone had been dumped. Lauryn also received pictures involving Chloe, so now Maine had a new problem. If Chloe was the sender, why keep making herself look guilty? That is when the theory started to change. Maybe Chloe was not the sender. Maybe someone was trying to make it look like Chloe. For Sheriff Maine, that was dangerous territory. Once everything seems to point at one person, it is easy to stop looking anywhere else. He had, after all, over 1,000 pages of messages to read through. So he kept reading, looking for the detail that didn't fit. Then another clue pulled the suspicion somewhere else. There had been a text conversation about a sweatshirt and a phone case. A picture connected to that conversation was later sent back to Owen and Lauryn from the unknown sender. The problem was where that picture seemed to come from. A family Christmas gathering. So here's where Maine asked a different question. Who would have been at that Christmas gathering and also connected to Owen's class? One name came up. Adriana, Owen's cousin. She was in his class. She was connected to the same student world. Maine questioned her about the messages and the Christmas party picture. Adriana denied being involved and later said the interview was intense and hurtful. After that, she felt like people at school were looking at her like she was guilty, but it still didn't give Sheriff Maine the proof he needed. Eventually, he had reached the limit of what he could do locally, so he took the case outside of Beal City to the FBI. In April of 2022, FBI help came in. The case reached Bradley Peter, a Bay City police officer working as a liaison to the FBI side of the investigation. Maine gave him a thumb drive with 720 pages of messages. Brad started with Owen's phone. He performed a full extraction, looking through messages, pictures, emails, and location data. If one of Owen's friends was behind this, maybe the phone would show it. But it didn't. Nothing in Owen's phone connected his friends to the messages, and the harassment was still moving. Owen had started talking to a girl from Pinconning, Michigan. For a moment, he started to feel like maybe life could get normal again. Then the same kind of messages found her too. Not just her. Her mother. The unknown sender had somehow found the mother's phone number and warned the girl to stay away from Owen. That told investigators something important. This was not only about Lauryn anymore. Whoever was doing this was still watching Owen. Owen and the Pinconning girl ended up breaking up because of this. Here's where investigators stopped looking at students and started looking harder at the number itself. One of the numbers traced back to Pinger, an app people can use to disguise their real phone number. Bradley submitted a search warrant to Pinger, and Pinger gave him 2 IP addresses connected to a Verizon network. Then Bradley submitted a search warrant to Verizon. In return, Verizon sent records showing which phone numbers were connected to those IP addresses when the messages were sent. Bradley started comparing those records against possible suspects. Owen and his mother, Jill, sent him phone numbers for other friends and people around him. Nothing matched. But once they widened the list again, one number kept coming up. Not Chloe, not Sophie, not Macy, not Adriana, but Kendra Licari, Lauryn's mother. Maine's first reaction to Bradley's discovery was no. It couldn't be Kendra. She was Lauryn's mom. She had been helping. She had been at school. She had been part of the parents' conversations, asking for updates, trying to find out who was doing this. So no, how could it be her? But now the digital trail was pointing back to her, and once Maine looked at it from that angle, other details started to feel different. Kendra had an IT background. She was around when some of the kids received the messages, and she had inserted herself into the investigation more than once, asking where things stood. Still, the case wasn't simple. An IP address could point to a connection. It couldn't, by itself, prove who was holding the device. Maine needed more. He needed the devices, and he needed a recorded confession. This is the moment from the beginning. Sheriff Maine and a detective were at Lauryn Licari's home with the search warrant. Kendra walked toward them outside. Maine said, "We gotta have a conversation." She answered, "Okay." He explained the warrant was for her devices and asked who else was home. Lauryn was there. Maine said he wanted Lauryn to stay in her room. Inside, as the devices were collected, Maine told Kendra what the investigation had found when the FBI got involved. Kendra asked what he meant. Maine told her the messages were coming from her. Kendra said no. Then Maine explained it plainly. The number was hidden through Pinger, but her number showed up behind the messages. Every message. Kendra then followed, "My number?" Maine said yes. He asked if this had anything to do with Owen, if there was some kind of infatuation there, and Kendra said no. But then the denial started to soften. She said it did not start that way. She said the first messages were random. Then she admitted she had, quote-unquote, fed off it some. It was not a clean confession, not at first, but it was enough for the case to change. The unknown number was not a girl from school. It was not a jealous teammate. It was not one of Owen's friends. It was Lauryn's mother. And Lauryn didn't know. Maine brought Lauryn in carefully. He told her they had found evidence. He told her mom had gotten wrapped up in it. He told her he did believe her. She in fact had no idea that her mom would be capable of doing this. Then Sheriff Maine had to call Lauryn's dad, Sean. Sean was at work when the call came in. He thought Maine was about to tell him who had been terrorizing his daughter. And Maine did. But the name was his own wife, Kendra. For almost 2 years on and off, everyone had been looking outward, at classmates, at teammates, at friends, at cousins, at anyone close enough to know the details. But the person behind the unknown number had been closer than all of them, inside Lauryn's own home.
All rise.
After the search warrant, the case moved into court. According to the felony complaint, State of Michigan versus Kendra Beal Licari, she was originally charged with 5 felony counts, 2 counts of stalking a minor, 2 computer-related communication counts, and 1 count of obstruction of justice. In the end, she pleaded guilty to 2 counts of stalking a minor, 1 count for Lauryn, and 1 count for Owen. 9 and 10 News would later report that Kendra was sentenced on April 26, 2023 to a prison term of 19 months to 5 years. In court, Kendra apologized to Owen and his family. She apologized to Chloe and her family. And she apologized to Lauryn. She said she had learned she was dealing with mental illness. She said she had been in crisis for years. She said if she could undo what she had done, she would. Owen later said Kendra's attention felt uncomfortable. He remembered small things, like her cutting his steak for him. That made it feel like, quote-unquote, something more. But for the people sitting in that courtroom, an apology could not erase what had already happened. My friends, Owen had been harassed, followed, accused, and pulled into a story he could not escape. Lauryn had been attacked by messages coming from the one person she should have been safest with. Chloe became a suspect. Adriana had been questioned. Friends turned on friends. Parents searched phones. An entire school lived under the pressure of one hidden number. And after all of that, what was still there was the love of a daughter. At sentencing, the court received letters from Lauryn saying she wanted a relationship with her mother again. That is one of the hardest parts of this case to sit with, because the person who hurt Lauryn was also the person she still loved. And that kind of bond doesn't disappear just because the truth is unbearable. According to Michigan Corrections records, Kendra was later listed as discharged on February 8, 2026. But the end of a sentence is not the same thing as the end of damage. This case started with a phone buzz, another, then another, a text before a Halloween party, a message about Owen, a rumor, a threat, a number that kept changing every time somebody tried to block it. And before anyone knew the truth, the damage had already spread. That is why this case stayed with me before Lurkers even existed, not only because of the reveal, but because of what happened before the reveal. For almost 2 years, people searched for the danger in the places that made sense: a jealous classmate, a teammate, a friend group, a cousin, a student in the hallway, someone on their phone during class. And every time the phone buzzed, trust got smaller. That is what anonymity can do when it is used as a weapon. It doesn't only hide the person sending the message, it makes everyone else look possible. And please, don't misunderstand me. The technology did not make Kendra do this. That choice was hers. But the digital world did empower her decision. The technology gave her a mask. It gave her new numbers, new area codes, a way to stand inside the investigation while appearing outside of it, a way to make children doubt each other, families doubt each other, and a school search everywhere except the one place nobody wanted to look. Because the danger online is not always a stranger. Sometimes it is someone who knows your routines, someone who knows your nickname, someone who knows who you love, who you fight with, what hurts you, and how to make a message sound like it could only come from someone close. The point here, my friends, is not to become suspicious of everyone. The point is not to live afraid of the people around you. The point is to save the proof, take the pattern seriously, and keep pushing until the evidence is louder than the rumor. Stay aware, stay present, stay safe. If this episode stayed with you, follow Lurkers on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen. Leave a rating or review if you can. It helps other listeners find the show. And share this episode with someone who needs to hear it. This episode of Lurkers was researched and written by me, Frank Battiston. Voiceover performances by Alexandria del Rosario. Production and sound design by Daniel Erdenevia. Thanks for listening.